Welcome back, students. This is Module 5.6.3, Plathelminthes, the flatworms. On this slide in front of you, you can see representatives of the three major groups of flatworms. The etymology of Plathelminthes, platy means flat, and helminth means worms. This literally means flatworms. Looking at the three representatives, in the upper left here, we have a planarian, genus Dugisia. These are the free-living flatworms. Free-living means non-parasitic. The other two groups, the flukes in the upper right and the tapeworms in the lower center, they're both parasitic. Now, as you look at the tapeworm in the lower center, you might see two spots. Sometimes people think those are eyes. There's actually four of those structures around, and those are actually suckers. And on the end there, we see a crown of hooks. These hooks and suckers are used to attach inside the digestive tract of a vertebrate upon which tapeworms are parasitic. Let's go ahead and look at the features of flatworms. Flatworms include the three groups I just mentioned: planarians, the free-living forms; flukes, which are parasitic forms; and tapeworms, which are parasitic forms. The body plan, these animals are flat, hence the name. They're solid worms, which is to say that they have no body cavity. They have an incomplete digestive tract, so their gut is a sac-like gut. They have three tissue layers. Now, the previous two phyla that we've studied include the porifera, which had no tissues, and the cnidarians, which had two tissue layers. These guys, the Plathelminthes, don't have a body cavity. It's solid around their gut. They show some cephalization, which means they show some sense organs and a rudimentary head, especially the free-living forms. The parasitic forms, not so much. And, of course, the fact that they have a flat body, this allows diffusion to meet their needs of gaseous exchange, so they absorb oxygen and carbon dioxide diffuses out. The skeleton, they don't really have one except for their muscular body. The parasites are inside the bodies of their hosts. Feeding, there's both parasitic and free-living forms. The symmetry of these animals is bilateral symmetry. There's one plane or line of symmetry that divides them into mirror image halves. The life cycle really is variable. We're going to look at a couple in detail. The three groups, though, that you do have to know is the free-living forms, and this is genus Dugisia. So you should know this as a representative genus of phylum Plathelminthes. We also have the Chinese liver fluke, and we'll talk about their life cycle in a moment. And then we have tapeworms, and we'll learn about their life cycle in a moment as well. First, we're going to start with phylum, with Dugisia. We're still in phylum Plathelminthes. And so Dugisia are just free-living forms. They tend to be aquatic. The vast majority of them are. There are some land planarians, but they're very uncommon, very rare. And these guys are scavengers or micro-predators. If you wanted to capture some and you knew there were some in a body of water, you should tie a tough piece of raw meat to a string and throw it out. They tend to be active in the dark, as we learned in the second lab that we did on the scientific method, where we looked at phototaxis in planarians, and we found that they tend to move away from light, and so they're active in the nighttime, and they use their chemosensory abilities to find their food. In any case, these are small little worms, and they really don't have much economic importance. Ecologically, they provide food for some things, and they clean up some things, but just a small group. Let's go ahead and look at the flukes, which have a much greater importance. The Chinese liver fluke is one such form, and we're going to, you should find a little spot to write the life cycle of this form. And when you start, you should begin by making a symbol like a Mercedes-Benz symbol, because it divides into three. And the reason it does that is because there are three hosts. Here I'm drawing a human, little stick man. Here I'm drawing a snail. Yeah, that's how it looks. And then I'm drawing a fish. These are really little more than symbols of the three. But you should recognize that there are these three. So we're going to start our description of the life cycle with the human. That is the definitive host. That's where sexual reproduction takes place. And once sexual reproduction takes place, they actually can have sex with themselves. But once they form eggs. The eggs pass out with the feces. So I'm going to put here eggs and feces. Now, in the places where these flukes occur, human feces are used as fertilizer to fertilize the rice fields, the rice paddies, and this is required. Otherwise, they will not produce enough food to feed their people, and starvation will result. So, although it may seem somewhat distasteful to use human waste in this manner, it is nevertheless necessary in the economic circumstances in which these people find themselves. So the eggs and the feces are eaten by the snail. Now, the snail may just be eating vegetation that has feces on them, or they may directly eat the feces. But once that happens, the eggs hatch inside the snail, and they undergo several rounds of asexual reproduction. Oops, that's A-S-E-X-U-A-L, asexual reproduction, in which one egg can become something like 50 or 60 parasites. So they undergo several rounds of asexual reproduction. The last stage is a swimming larva, and it looks kind of like a tadpole, except it's microscopic. It has a globular body, and I'm just going to call this a swimming larva. It's actually called a cercaria, but swimming larva will do here. And the swimming larva will actually find a fish, and it burrows into the muscle, and it encysts. That is, it forms a structure in the muscle called a cyst. And there it will sit until that fish is eaten. So either raw or poorly cooked fish, because if you cook the fish well, it kills the parasite. Raw or poorly cooked fish is eaten. This is how a human could be infected. Of course, in parts of the Orient, just lightly steaming your fish or eating your fish raw is the culturally appropriate thing to do. And then these animals will take up residence, and they take up residence often in a bile duct, which goes from the liver, hence the name liver fluke, and they will reproduce and create eggs, and the cycle continues on. So the major steps are out here. And the snail and the fish, and then we're back there. Suppose that you were in the Peace Corps and your responsibility was to reduce the level of infection of Chinese liver flukes among the people. How could you attack this life cycle? There are several places. Well, the typical response I get, well, why we could just have them cook their fish. Well, this is a very difficult thing. It's the cultural equivalent of having Americans eat their hamburgers raw. It's just not likely to happen. And so a second thing that often people say is, well, we could get rid of the snails. Well, snails are very difficult to get rid of, and it would require chemicals. If you had chemicals to buy snail killer, you could probably buy fertilizer and avoid the whole problem that way as well. But the most likely way, by the way, and here they're listed, cook the fish. The most likely way is number 2 here, and that's if you take the waste, the human feces, which is euphemistically called night soil, so that's what they call human feces they use to fertilize the rice paddies, and you store it for several weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, the parasites actually die, the eggs die and become non-viable. And that is probably the best way to control it. As I already said, eliminating the snails isn't a good bet. And in getting here, I did go through this. This just shows the Centers for Disease Control life cycle of the Chinese liver fluke. And it shows, here's all the, down here in this rectangle in the lower left, it shows all the levels of asexual reproduction. You start, the mycelium hatches from the egg, and inside it there are sporocysts. Inside the sporocysts there are redia. Inside the redia there are cercaria. So you can get a lot of these from one egg. In any case, That's all we're going to tell you about the Chinese liver fluke and about flukes in general. And we want to look at the third group of platyhelminths, the tapeworms. Now, this is an interesting worm. If you look at its body, there's two parts that you definitely need to know, the scolex and the proglottids. The scolex is an organ of attachment. It is not the head, but it is also the area that germinates new proglottids. And so it has hooks and suckers, and it germinates or grows these new proglottids. And the proglottids closest to the scolex are very small, and we call them immature. They get further away, we call them mature. And at the very tail end of the tapeworm, the proglottids are very large, and we call them ripe. These ripe proglottids break off and pass out with the feces. Now, tapeworms are sex machines. They are hermaphrodites having both testes and ovaries, and they have sex with themselves. Once a tapeworm has found a home, and it's pretty uncommon for a tapeworm to arrive in this home. The home is the digestive system of a vertebrate animal. Once it's in there, it has it made pretty much, because tapeworms don't have a digestive tract. They make the host digest the food, and they just absorb the nutrients. And as they're absorbing nutrients, they're having sex with themselves. And so this is a pretty cushy life they have there. The major danger is that they would get passed out with the feces, and so that's why they have the hooks and the suckers, and they try not to leave. One thing I will mention is in the past, the scolices, or that's the plural of scolex, the scolices were sold as diet pills. And so you could lose some weight, and once you'd lost enough, you just take a low dose of poison, and that would kill the worm, and it would pass out. Now, the way that the life cycle works is that you have to have an infected animal. This is the beef tapeworm that I'm showing here. And so you'd have a cyst inside the muscle of a cow. And then you have to eat rare beef. And once you do that, the cyst that has a scolex inside would become a tapeworm. And inside it would grow up into your intestine, and there it would have sex with itself and produce lots of proglottids. And the proglottids have to pass out, and they have to be eaten by a cow. So you have to have poor hygiene, poor care of sewage for this life cycle to perpetuate. Anyway, they are interesting animals, and there have been cases of the pork tapeworm of the cysts actually ending up in the brain and causing all sorts of problems there. And so these things, it doesn't help the worm when it lands there, but it certainly is hard on the host. It can create symptoms similar to a tumor. In any case, with that, we're going to conclude this module.